I just want people to fall in love with the basics again. I want people to fall in love with what it's like to get a sentence right. I want people to know what it's like to watch the ink come out of the brush and lay on the page wet in the sunshine. I mean, I'm not trying to make the big, but what it feels like to nail a piece when you're, playing the piano, when you finally get this bar right, it's just that to fall in love with the real basics of it again, the feeling it gives you when you're doing it and not everything around you.
I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com.
Our mission at Unmistakable Creative is to bring you conversations with insanely interesting people. But that's not all. It's also to help you become one of them. I've never met a person that doesn't have creative ideas, but I've met a lot of people who haven't figured out how to bring them to life. And even if you have very little time, no experience, and no idea where to start, with very few of the right skills and systems, you can create and sustain real progress, and I can teach you how to do that. That's one of the reasons we launched Unmistakable Prime, our monthly subscription, and for the first time, we're offering a free 2-week trial. Prime is designed to help creatives like you bring their best ideas to life. It includes all of our courses, live office hours twice a month, a book club, webinars, and an amazing community of creatives. Our members have started podcasts, landed new clients, increased their revenue, developed new skills. Every week, we hear new awesome updates from people, and there's no reason that you couldn't be next. For a limited time, you can actually try Prime for free for 2 weeks. Prices go up on March 18th, so don't wait. Go to prime.unmistakablecreative.com. Join us today.
Austin, welcome back to the Unmistakable Creative.
It's been a while. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. I mean, I think right before we hit record, you were saying it's been 6 years. I think that I interviewed you right around the time we rebranded the show as Unmistakable Creative, and we were talking about Steal Like an Artist. You've had 2 other books since then, Show Your Work and Keep Going. As I was saying, Keep Going is probably my absolute favorite one. And I've always appreciated your rawness and, realness about the creative life. But before we get into your work, I want to start by asking you a question which has nothing to do with it, because that's how I start interviews, as you know. And that is, what religious or spiritual beliefs were you raised with, and how did those end up impacting your life?
I was raised Methodist. So it was very, I went to church every Sunday. And, the Methodists are pretty chill. It feels a little bit like a business meeting sometimes, like donuts and coffee in the parlor. And so I was altar. It's not really an altar boy, but I was an usher. I was in the choir. I was confirmed like in 6th grade. My mom still goes to that church. So I grew up with my paternal grandmother is intensely religious, and I always felt like she's kind of my line to the big man when I was growing up. I don't think of it as a big man anymore. That was just when I was growing up. I love that you asked this question, because I literally was the other day thinking I would listen to a whole podcast where they just asked this question, because I feel deeply that a lot of my favorite artists either still have some sort of religious faith or practice, really a practice, or they've replaced that religious upbringing with art. Like a lot of my favorites, that's sort of the case. So I would probably say, it's impossible for the stuff not to influence you in some way. But I'm not really a practicing Christian right now. But I am, that stuff sticks around. I'm deeply influenced by it, I would say. I have, it's interesting. I have Christian friends who are able to speak about things in the culture that I'm really interested in a language I don't seem to have. So, for example, I'm very curious in this culture, what is the role of forgiveness? Whether there's any role for forgiveness in this culture, and that is an answer that my Christian friends have. That my atheist or agnostic or just whatever friends don't have. So it's interesting how it. But I would say the things that it deeply impacted me by, and I don't mean to go so long with this, but I think it's
please talk for as long as you want. You can give me 20-minute answers.
Yeah, it's something I think about all the time, particularly because my father is born again, and he's he'll call me on the phone and ask me what are you going to say to God when you die? So it's like I have to think, that's to have the person who helped bring you into the world ask you, well, what do you think about going to hell? Every once in a while is a pretty rough thing. And I love my dad, and I try to remain really close to him. And so it's interesting to me. I think the thing I've noticed, my wife's Catholic, and so we always joke that if we go back to church, we'll just be Episcopalian. We'll just meet in the middle, Methodist and Catholic. But I think the thing the church really did for me is I just loved music so deeply when I was a kid, and the music, singing in the choir. I still think that singing, it's hard during the pandemic because singing in a church choir is literally the most dangerous thing you could do right now. Singing projects all sorts of, we know now that the droplets and stuff, that's literally the most contagious activity you could participate in, is singing with a group of people. Unfortunately, I think it's one of the most beautiful things you can do with other human beings is singing together. And so I think for me, it was, the music was a big deal. I met my best friend in Sunday school. We both kind of hated church and hated Sunday school. So we met, his mom was the Sunday school teacher. So we met over by the piano and started plinking out Green Day songs. That's nice. And we're still best friends, So I think the church, so it was deeply, deeply influential on me when I was younger. I mean, to the point where, God's funny. I particularly think in this age of I think it's interesting how religion and capitalism mix. I have a funny story about that. When I was a kid, I literally prayed to God for a Ghostbusters proton pack for Christmas. That's how deeply, and I got it.
Wow. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I love that, we're talking about this, and I love that you brought up this idea of meeting in the middle. And I think that to me is one of the reasons I asked this question of all the ones that I could ask you, because, we live in this very divisive kind of time. And I wonder, as somebody who has come from faith and married outside of that same faith, how do you think we find that middle? I think that, I think there was I don't know if I'm not a sports fan, but I watched the Super Bowl primarily for the commercials. Yeah. I could care less about the game. And I remember my favorite commercial was the one about the Jeep commercial, where they specifically talked about, not blue states, red states, but, meeting in the middle. And I wonder, what do you think it takes, and what role do you think art can play in that?
Well, I think that the thing about I am interested in the practice of religion. I am interested in how religion has practices. It has rituals and routines, and it has spaces and special ceremonies and things like that. I always was attracted to that kind of stuff when I was younger. I was always, there's a great book called Religion for Atheists by Alain de Botton, and he talks about this. The thing he says that I love, it's so blasphemous, but to him, he said the least interesting thing about a religion to him is whether it's true. Yeah. He's like, it's everything else that's so interesting. And for me, I mean, and this is what's hard, when I try to connect with my father, he he is that brand of evangelical that cannot get over. If you don't believe, that there's no point to anything. So, like, when I'm talking to him, I'm kind of chuckling to myself because I know he sits down every morning with his Bible and reads and works in a notebook. I mean, he has a daily devotional just like I do. We do the same thing every morning. We commune, we read, we sort of think about how we want our day to go. I just don't pray to, you know what I mean? I'm just not, it's just, we do the same practice. I just don't have a belief, a really strong belief about it. I have always felt that belief would come through practice rather than you believe and then you practice. Now, this is just my own life I'm talking about, but it impacts me. I mean, that is exactly how I feel about art, because there are a lot of people out there that tell you, well, if you just believe you're an artist, then you can sit down and make art. You have to give yourself permission to whatever. For me, I'm like, no, you start the doing, you do the verb first, you practice, and then you will become, eventually someone else will call you an artist. It's none of your business whether you're an artist or not. Someone else will decide that for you. What is important is the practice. And I know that Seth just had that book come out, which I unfortunately haven't got time to read yet. But for me, what attracts me to religion is the practice, having something to do. The great religions give us things to do. And for me, that is what life is about. It is about, and again, this is somewhere where the thing about meeting in the middle is it requires both parties to extend.
Yeah.
And if you have one party that is just like completely incurious about the other party, then there's no chance of meeting in the middle. And I think that's where you see, that's what you see in the culture right now, is there's really just a basic incuriosity about the other side. And then there's no meeting in the middle, because you can't meet in the middle when it's just one side trying to meet there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't build a bridge over, without it coming from both sides of the chasm.
If you're a small business owner, there are all sorts of things that are necessary but take up a ton of time. Meetings, managing your finances, and dealing with payroll. As an owner, your time is valuable and you want to spend it on doing the things you're best at. If you're like me and you suck at math, chances are that payroll is probably not your best skill, and there are better things you could be doing with your time. Say hello to a new way to payroll. Roll by ADP is a chat-based payroll app for small businesses. Roll truly helps you make the most of your time. It's as easy as opening the app and telling Roll to run your payroll. Less than a minute later, payroll is done, and all you had to do was send a chat. Even better, Roll is smart. It learns your payroll and notifies you when it's time to run. Roll also double checks with you if something seems off, so you can stay focused on running everything else. Powered by AI, Roll is more than just keep up. It learns your business and stays ahead, sending you proactive notifications when it's time to run payroll, so you can stay focused on the important stuff. For a limited time, Roll's monthly fee is discounted at just $17 a month. So download the Roll by ADP app today and go to getroll.com/chat. Again, that's getroll.com/chat. Sound plays a much bigger role in our lives than most of us even are aware of. An EPOS podcast powered by audio tells stories behind the sounds we hear every day, sounds that inform, entertain, educate, get our attention, influence our behavior, and save our lives. Randy Zuckerberg and her guests explore how audio shapes our experience and how pioneers are creating the sound of the future. You know all those sounds from your devices when you're using apps or receiving text messages or anything else online? Well, it turns out somebody actually has a job doing that. Randy talks to the experts behind these sounds to find out about the work that goes into designing what she calls those sonic logos. As a podcast host, I think a lot about how sound impacts us, whether we're hearing it on a podcast or from a notification on a phone or from some app we're using. And if you want to learn more about the impact that sound has on our lives, listen and subscribe to EPOS's Powered by Audio on Acast, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
So I want to come back to this, but you mentioned this idea of art, and this was one of my favorite quotes from the book. You said, if you wait for someone to give you a job title before you do the work, you might never get to do the work at all. You can't wait around for someone to call you an artist before you'll make art. You'll never make it. And I think the reason that struck me is because I see so many people who are just sitting and waiting. I mean, hell, even you and I were talking before we hit record about how, I got the 2-book deal with the publisher. And, once the contract was up, I sat around sending, book proposals, waiting, in the words of Seth Godin, to be picked. And ironically, the reason I got that book deal was because I didn't sit around waiting to be picked. So what do you think it is that causes people to sit around waiting? Like, what the hell are they waiting for?
I don't know. I mean, I kind of waited too. I mean, the thing is like, I sort of waited for someone to pick me, but I was putting things into the world as invitations. You know what I mean? I mean, there was a certain element of, I was waiting for that editor to call. I was always bad about that in my I still am, I'm still like, what am I waiting on, in a sense? I think the difference is that it's one thing to wait, but waiting without the work is, that's what I see. Is I just see a lot of people like waiting to work, not waiting to get picked. I mean, they're really waiting to work. And you just have to do the work that you think needs to be done. I mean, you got to do the job that you want. You have to invent it, in a sense, but I think, I always think punk rock helps with all this stuff. I think having a little bit of being in touch with that kind of DIY spirit of the 80s and 90s, or even the late 70s, the kind of punk aesthetic of I think every artist should read like Michael Azrad's book, Our Band Could Be Your Life. I think you should read about artists who literally there was no scene happening and they just made it happen. I think that's a fundamentally American thing, I think, is to be in the middle of nowhere and to hit the road and, that kind of thing. I've always been really influenced by the kind of do-it-yourself ethic of punk, and not thinking of punk as a style, but as a real way of being, I always think that helps. And I think every generation sort of needs to rediscover punk because its roots go deep, it goes beyond the 70s, that idea of like, we're just going to do it ourselves. But I don't know. I mean, I think in some ways, and I could be wrong about this, but I think a lot of it has to do with school, to be honest. I mean, student of the month. Hey, here's our straight A's. I mean, like we're conditioned at a very early age that there are authorities that grant us privileges and rewards, and that happens at a very early age. My kids, for example, through a variety of reasons, haven't been to school like much at all, really. Like my youngest has been to preschool for a little bit, and like my oldest has maybe done a year of public school. Between like us homeschooling and the pandemic, and they don't wait around for me to tell them whether they can do anything. Like they're just like, well, maybe I'll do this. I could do that. Like maybe I'll make my own animated show, or maybe I'll, they just don't have that, whatever it is. And I don't know if that's just because I've been encouraging of them or they see me working all the time, but they're not waiting around for the title, but I do think that, I was talking to the teacher, and look, I love teachers. I don't like school. That's a distinctive, let me say that right away. I love teachers. I don't like school. I love teachers. I don't like the systems they work in. And like almost every teacher I meet has infinite patience and a good heart, at least the ones I meet. But, I was talking to the teacher that my son Owen was going to have for second grade, I think. And it's hard to remember what grade they're in because of the pandemic. But she said to me, so is Owen more of a STEM kid or is he more of an arts kid? And I was just like, he's 8 years old.
Wow.
What in the hell? Like, why do we do this? It's hard for me, to even, I mean, we just speak, teachers are trained to speak these languages now. through, I mean, it's so embedded. And part of the problem is that, you know, a lot of young teachers now, you know, they went to school and then they became a teacher. So it's just like they speak the language of school. Like school is really school teaches you about school, you know, and so that's sort of what happens at school is like you get better at school by going to school. So, you know, I just think a lot of this happens through school and in conditioning, and then, you know, you get put in the marketplace where someone has to, you know, pick you for a job and that kind of thing. So, you know, the beautiful thing about art, I think, and, you know, of course there are issues of power and access and things like that. But at the end of the day, I do think people have a pretty good shot as far as, you know, if you do amazing stuff, somebody's going to notice.
Yeah, there's so many layers to this whole discussion on school. And so, you know, I will ask you a question that I tend to ask college professors. And I know you're not an educator, but I think from your perspective, I'd be really curious. So, you know, I agree. I think my teachers were phenomenal. I was the beneficiary of extraordinary music teachers in Texas who gave me, you know, the skills to practice. They taught me what discipline meant. They made me better than I ever would have been at anything. And so I wonder, you know, based on our discussion here, if you were given the task of redesigning the system from the ground up, what would you do? How would you restructure it?
I would turn, I would probably make things look more like a library. I think, you know, libraries are a terrific anecdote, not an anecdote, an antidote to schools. I think that libraries, because of their emphasis on all ages, lifelong education and resources, if you walk into a public library, I mean, I'm getting a little weepy talking about it because I haven't been in a library for a year. But in the before times, when you would walk into a good public library, there were people of just everybody. Just, you know, there were homeless guys off the street. There were moms with strollers. There were elderly people learning about computers. I mean, really, the whole kind of spread of the community was there. And I think, you know, libraries, because they are there libraries do a lot of education, but it has to be asked for. You know, it's people that are looking for the material or looking for the skills. So I would actually make schools look more like libraries where, you know, it's kind of like you come there and there's a buffet, you know, and there are people there, there's programming and there's access. You know, it might look like, I suppose in some ways when you look at free schools, they kind of look a little bit more like that. But, you know, for me, it would be more about self-direction. It would be more about community-based stuff, like getting people immediately. I think young people in particular need to see real people in the world working as early as possible. I think that, you know, I think apprenticeships are so important. I mean, I was so lucky when I was in school. I sort of had this basically office gopher job in high school for an attorney that my dad knew. It was just wonderful because I immediately realized I didn't want to be a lawyer. You know? And I was just so, I was thinking about it. I was like, man, I'll bet there's people who go to law school who have literally never stepped in front of a law office. Like I'm sure there are people, you know what I mean? So it's just like, I don't know. My vision for America is better libraries. I believe deeply in the library because I think it's the last democratic institution that really operates the way it needs to be operating. I really think that, and they're so strapped. I mean, they really are one of the last resources for a lot of communities. So I would like to, and I should say that when I'm thinking about the home I'm creating for my children, I think it's a lot of dads I talk to, they speak as teachers. They're like, oh, I'm going to, I'm going to teach them to ride a bike, and I'm going to teach them to throw a football, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I'm going to teach them all these things, and there's like a million songs about dads who are going to, all the, stuff they're going to teach their children or whatever. And I have always felt the opposite. I have felt very much like, well, I will create a space for them to learn in, but I'm not sure I really have that much to teach them. And so I've always felt like I was more of a librarian for my kids. I create a world in which they can be safe and explore their interests. I fill the house with a lot of materials like books and, kind of curated DVDs and iPads and, musical instruments and stuff like that. And then we have some programming, field trips and whatnot. But on the whole, I think of myself as a librarian in which my kids come to me with their interests, and I use my very limited skills in putting them in, I put them in touch with the materials they need, and then they sort of do it. So libraries, I should note that my first job out of college was working in a public library. And I think it shaped me profoundly. At the time, I didn't realize how important it was. And it really had a profound effect on my life to the point where, I started out in life wanting to be a teacher. And now I think of myself more as a librarian.
Amazing. So before we start diving deep into Keep Going, I wanted to ask you a question that came up for me earlier in our conversation. You said you've had this best friend that you have known, since Sunday school when you were kids. We had Lydia Denworth, who wrote this beautiful book on the psychology of friendship here. Hands down, probably one of my favorite books I read last year. What is it that allows a friendship to sustain for that long? Because I think, one thing I saw in my adult life is people moved away. We were all in different chapters of our lives. Like my friends who are married, honestly, like as a guy who's still single, some of them are great, but, I don't get invited on, weekend trips with couples anymore because, it'd be awkward. But I wonder, what is it that allows a friendship to sustain for that long? Or what's allowed your friendship to last for that long?
I think shared experience. I just think, shared formative experiences as a young person, it forms shared experience. And at a young age, and in my opinion, it forms a bond that can be picked up at any time. I mean, when I'm around my friends that I made, before the age of 20, I find that we can sort of pick things up in a way that it just doesn't, it's like we're right back there. Yeah. And this is with my very close friends. I mean, some of those friendships, of course, the ones that seem to stick around are the ones that can be, it's almost like a video game save game or something. You just load it up, and you're right there where you left off. I also think there is just something so deeply bonding about hating your surroundings and finding someone else that hates it as much as you do. I mean, my buddy Corey and we hated where we grew up. We just hated it. And music was, we were just like, we can be rock stars. We can get out of here. We can just get out of here. Or at least that was my end of it. I thought, here's somebody who hates it as much as I do. I think the truth is that he didn't hate it as much as I did. And he sort of, but didn't go quite as far. I grew up in Ohio, so I'm far from home. I might as well be on Mars, really. But and I think about that in college, like some of my really great friends in college just, hated the main campus experience and thought that our other students were just morons. We just hated everybody. And I feel like we had a gang, and that unity. I think a lot about gangs. I don't know a lot about gangs, but I just feel like when I roll around with my crew, Maybe crew is the right word. I like how rappers use that term, crew. I mean, I just feel like I'm in a gang when I'm with my kids. I mean, when my wife and I and our kids, we were like walking around the neighborhood, I just feel like we're a bunch, like a real crew. And I think, if you were going to let me lie down on the couch, what is a podcast episode, but that, I would say that I've always just been desperately searching for people who cared about the same things that I did, because I grew up in an area that didn't. I mean, I grew up in rural America, and, I've always felt this isn't fair as a heterosexual white man for me to say this, but, my gay friends, I always really felt really close to them because, I mean, they use the same words for you if you like music and you like to dance, or whether you like the same sex, I mean, it's all the same to them. You're different. Difference is difference in these areas. I do think it's gotten better, weirdly. Like, I go back home now and I think the culture's changed a lot, but growing up in the 80s, it wasn't the most enlightened time to be living in rural America. But
I can relate. I grew up in a small Texas town. So
yeah. So, I mean, and I think that's a bond that you find. I mean, my buddy who's from small town Ohio and lives in LA now, I mean, he says, if you're from small town Ohio and you got out and you work in the arts, like, we're going to be friends. There's something about, you meet people who sort of got out. But there's also a great Patton Oswalt routine. Patton Oswalt had this routine called Sterling, Virginia. And he just talked about how much he hated his small town. He's like, just is despising this existence. And later he did a routine where he basically said, you know what? Maybe I was the crazy one, because I get on Facebook and all these people are happy. They've got kids and their grandparents are around and like whatever. Maybe I'm the misfit. Maybe I was the one that, yeah, good. Get out of here, man. And I thought that was I love that when artists revisit previous work and they say, you know what? That was really funny when I said that, but it's not the whole truth. I mean, I'm delighted by that self, like that correction in a sense.
I appreciate that more than you can possibly imagine, because I think that, as weird as it is, in some way, I feel like the work that people like you and I do, the work that people like Chris Gilbo and Tim Ferriss do, we, to some degree, plant seeds of dissatisfaction in people's lives where there aren't any.
Right.
It's kind of like, who's to say, that living in the Midwest, raising a family and working a 9-to-5 job isn't a good life. Like I've been working on the self-published book, and I have a section called A Good Enough Life. And, I think that for the longest time, I felt like, wow, the people in these circles that teach us stuff, it's almost like we have this elitist attitude that we're superior to people who don't choose to pursue, this sort of passion-driven quest in their life. And
yes,
and I think with age, that's kind of just dawned on me as, no, this is not accurate. There are multiple ways to live a great life.
Well, and it's an enormous privilege to be able to live off your passion. I mean, it really turns to speak in that language is to really, is to minimize the to sort of minimize the challenges of so many people who are barely scraping by. I mean, this is a privileged thing to talk about. I mean, that's why I am just trying hard to push people to realize that, creative work keeps you alive. It's supposed to make life worth living, not make life harder. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just so, there was I read this interview with Adam Phillips, the psychologist, one time, and he just said, the tragedy of art is that so many people come to it out of pain, and they really would have been much better off doing something else. Like, art seems like something that'll they're really suffering from something else, and they think that art's going to fix it, and really it just makes it worse, is basically what he's saying. And I look around, I see a lot of people who are like whipping themselves, trying to become what they think is like a great artist or whatever. And I just want people to fall in love with the basics again. I want people to fall in love with what it's like to get a sentence right. I want people to know what it's like to watch the ink come out of the brush and lay on the page wet in the sunshine. I mean, I'm not trying to make a big, but what it feels like to nail a piece when you're, playing the piano, when you finally get this bar right, it's just that to fall in love with the real basics of it again, the feeling it gives you when you're doing it, and not everything around you.
So last year was kind of a disaster for most of us, to put it lightly. But if there's one gift that the pandemic gave us, it was the time to express our creativity and bring our ideas to life. And no matter what 2021 holds in store, you can spend your time creating something meaningful with one of Skillshare's online classes. They have classes on illustration, graphic design, photography, writing, and so much more. If you're interested in learning a skill, Skillshare probably has a class for it. Former Unmistakable Creative guest Andy Pizza has a course titled Find Your Style, where you can discover your creative DNA and bring that thing that makes you unmistakable to your work. And Skillshare is also super affordable, especially when you compare it to some pricey in-person classes. So without breaking the bank, you can explore the things that interest you most for less than $10 a month. Explore your creativity at Skillshare.com/create and get a free trial of their premium membership. Again, that's Skillshare.com/create. So a couple of nights ago, I couldn't really sleep. And when I woke up in the morning, I was struggling to put together a coherent sentence, which is really annoying considering that writing is the first thing that I do every morning. And I just felt off. Maybe you've had a night like that too, where the whole day kind of falls apart. Well, I loaded up Newcom on my phone, put on some headphones and their eye mask. 20 minutes later, I felt like I'd compensated for not getting enough sleep and somehow got this amazing power nap. Of course, it's not a substitute for getting enough sleep, but stress, sleep recovery, whether in the gym or at work, these things really shape how we perform. And they're things you've heard every one of our podcast guests talk about. But for those days when you do wake up in a bit of a funk, Newcom can be a game changer. Newcom is the only stress management system of its kind that's clinically proven in over 1 million sessions to improve your sleep. Reduce your stress, boost your recovery without drugs or side effects. The Newcom system uses cutting-edge neuroscience and consists of 3 non-invasive and non-pharmaceutical items, all of which are included in your monthly subscription, which costs less than a daily cup of coffee. And the whole process is super easy to use and to work into your daily routine to achieve better sleep reduction and stress and boost recovery. So when you wake up in a bit of a funk, own the day with Newcom. We have a special link set up just for our listeners. Go to creativenewcom.com and get 50% off your 30-day subscription of Newcom and their money-back guarantee. Again, that's Creative Newcom, creative, Nucalm.com. It's not just what you sell that moves the bottom line, it's also how you upgrade the customer experience. And in a crowded marketplace where customers can go wherever they wish with the tap of a button, you need every edge you can get. Introducing Citizens Pay. It's a buy now, pay later solution that lets your shoppers get the upgrades they want right away by paying for them in smaller pieces over time. I recently used Citizens Pay to get a new top-of-the-line ergonomically designed home office chair, and I do my research, and I love the fact that I didn't have to settle for less than the best reviewed chair on the market. I could still fit it into my monthly budget by spreading out the cost over a number of months. And when customers like me get the things they want, so does your business. More purchasing power with your business today means more customer loyalty in the long run. So while your customers enjoy their new 64-inch zillion pixel TVs, state-of-the-art exercise equipment, and 6-burner stoves to fry, saute, and steam with perfection, you'll be enjoying a nice little boost to your bottom line. Citizens Pay. Get the power to upgrade how you do business.
Yeah, I love this because, my second book was called An Audience of One, Reclaiming Creativity for Its Own Sake. And,
yes.
I think for
Which
the
is
weeks
a great title. I mean, I love that title.
Well, I'll be sure to send you a copy. For the weeks and months after, of course, I was really, really stressed about book sales And I mean, I can't tell you how many times in an interview I've said, yes, I wrote this message, but I'm sure my publisher would be a lot happier if it was reaching an audience of millions. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm missing the point of my own damn book here.
Yes.
And it took me a long time to get back to that. Like, I remember I wrote this collection of essays called The Scenic Route, which is probably the least read thing I've ever written. And somebody who'd interviewed me read that. And he said, I loved this. And I said, yeah, I actually didn't do that for anybody. I wrote it for myself. And it was probably the most fun I've had in a long time working on a writing project. Because I mean, that was the first time in probably 3.5 years that I had a project that nobody was going to pay me for. I wasn't under any contract for it. And it really changed how, I showed up. But one thing, before we start diving into this whole creative thing, I do want to ask you one thing about your friendships. And part of the reason I think this is on my mind is, one, we just had Mitch Prinstein here who wrote a book called The Power of Likability in a Status Obsessed World. And he has this section at the end where he talks about the 7 stages of status elevation and how you go from being sort of, lingering in obscurity where nobody knows you to suddenly like all these people know you. And yet it's such a hard task to distinguish like who is there because of, Austin Kleon, the author of Steal Like an Artist, and who's there because of Austin, the kid in Sunday school who was my best friend. What has that experience been like for you? Because I find, that has often been something that I've struggled with. I'm like, okay, do people really know me or do they know the character that I've created online?
Well, this is why I just think pseudonyms are so powerful. And I love like whatever Lady Gaga's name is. I don't know her name, but it's got to be helpful for her to say, well, I'm not Lady Gaga. Cary Grant used to say, everybody wants to be Cary Grant. Even I want to be Cary Grant. Or it's, or Bob Dylan used to say, it's Halloween. It's a good thing I got my Bob Dylan mask on. Like these people knew like what they were, like the Austin Kleon that most people know is just me. Like, it's like a version of me. It's like a very helpful, happy, helpful version of me, my friends think it's hilarious that I've written these books because they know me as this, they know me as this deeply, like, kind of curmudgeonly. I've always been kind of a grumpy, old guy, even when I was 19. And so my friends think it's hilarious, but I'm trying to be, that's why I think, I don't think it's inauthentic. I think it's me attempting to, we started the conversation talking about religion. Redemption. There are so many things that, Christianity offers that like kind of aren't on sale or available in a secular world, like redemption or forgiveness, that kind of thing. I think that, in some ways, in my books, I'm sort of trying to redeem myself. I'm trying to, I am trying to help people. Day to day, I don't really care what happens to most of the on a day-to-day basis, I'm sort of like, there's a great Peanuts, there's a great Peanuts panel, where Linus says, I love mankind. It's the people I can't stand. It's that kind of, I think, everyone quotes that Martin Luther King line, human salvation lies in the hands of the creatively maladjusted. If you go back and read it, though, what he's really talking about is that, maladjustment in a rotten world is it's natural. It's natural to be maladjusted to a rotten world, to a world in which there are injustices and stuff like that. So, what he's saying is, and I think what he was really talking about is, to be creative, to imagine something new or different takes a sort of distaste, or something has to be wrong. Something has to be missing. If you were perfectly happy, so for example, if you're perfectly happy with going to homecoming and playing football and, the way that small town American life plays out, then you don't imagine anything different, You know what I mean? So it's like the thing we talked about earlier, maladjustment. It's very hard to be creative without that maladjustment, to not see that there are things in life that could be improved. And I just think this is such basic information that everyone forgets about. Like, sometimes you just like have to strip things down to a very basic level. If you think the world is perfect, then why would you ever make anything of it? There wouldn't be, there wouldn't be any reason to make anything, right? And so I think that, I have always felt in my work, and I've been trying to write a little bit more about this to get people to understand this. I'm helpful and kind in my work, but that comes from this place of deep disgust, of deep, I mean, just not a hatred, because hatred's wasted energy, a disgust with civilization, just a disgust with, just an itching, an agitation, just a itchiness against what is, the norm or whatever. Like, that's where the work comes from. And like, I think that's very personal to me. But when I look at some of my favorite artists, which of course are the ones that speak to me and therefore would be the most like me, probably, this stuff, this beautiful life affirming stuff comes out of a deep pit of disgust. And there is a redemption there. There is a redeeming of, there is a taking in and putting out of, you sort of become like a refinery somehow. You're taking in this stuff that's like bothering you, and you're transforming it into something, and it's so powerful. And it's so much what I wish people would think more about. I mean, we're just so like, I don't know, you're in this world. It just, everyone's like happy go, oh, be creative. Get out your paints and, and it's like, think of something that's deeply wrong and try to correct it, fix. And that's as simple as take a pair of jeans that are ripped and sew them back together. Like, that is a creative act. And I guess this is another thing that I was thinking deeply about with Keep Going, is just everything in the culture right now, as far as creativity, is sort of pitched at us as vandalism. Like, if you think about like the big tech companies, they all have these slogans that are just about like, make your mark, put a dent in the universe, move fast and break things. It's all just dudes messing stuff up. It's like vandalism metaphors, right? And so I was just like, I've just been so deeply influenced by like, like quilters. Like, I find quilting to be just this incredible art form where you're taking these discarded scraps and you're transforming them into these beautiful, what I think are works of art that also have a function in that they could keep someone warm. So if you look at I'm looking at someone like Rosie Lee Tompkins, or anyone in that, Gee's Bend area that does those quilts. That to me is like such a wonderful, wonderful, kind of opposition to this make your mark thing, and the way those women, and they're mostly women, talk about listening to their materials and letting the quilt become what it wants to be. I find that to be so it's freedom, because listening to men talk about wrangling the canvas into, I'm projecting my, that I think, sometimes it's interesting because I think a lot of men, when they think about feminism, or they think about looking at the work of women or whatever it is, I think they think that something's going to be taken away from them somehow. But for me, it's just a completely opposite way of thinking. It's just opened my life up so much to look at art forms like quilting or something like that, where, even the art world might say something more like, well, that's craft, that's not art. It's just opened me up so much. It's just like, there's so many more possibilities for work then. Because if you're just like, well, what mark can I make on the world? Like that's one way of doing it. But if you do other things, like I start looking at the world and I'm like, well, where are the gaps? Where are the things that have been torn? Where are the patches that I could, where are the holes? Where's the effort that needs done? Where are the things that need connecting that no one's connected yet? Like, what's the quilt I could spin out of this? That's just like a profoundly different. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, as a writer, I take language so seriously. And I just think the metaphors that we serve up in this culture, I mean, one thing I would recommend to people is spend a week just paying attention to metaphor. Just spend a week just paying attention to how people talk about stuff like the war of art or the battle of creativity. Like, just think about like all the military terms people use to talk about art and creative work. And then think about what the opposite metaphor would be and ask yourself if it opens you up more. Because I just, there's a book called Metaphors We Live By. And
yep, on my shelf. It's a hard read.
I haven't actually read it.
Yeah, me either. I tried. I've tried like 4 times. Yeah,
it's like one of those books, but we invent our metaphors and then they invent us. It's like what Kleon said about tools. It's like we invent our tools and then they invent us. And so I encourage, particularly the men listening, to think deeply about the kind of metaphors you've been given for work and life, and think about what the opposite might be. Because my reading of feminism, and I don't even know why I brought this up, it's just, to me, it's a complete reordering of the world. It's not about, it's not about women taking over or having equal power or anything like that. It's literally a restructuring of our culture. And I find that as a creative person, finding these other models of thinking, these other metaphors, it's just changed my life. It just makes life more interesting and opens up possibility.
It's funny you brought that up, of all things, because I remember, I don't know if you've seen it. There's a documentary on Netflix that Oliver Stone did called The Untold History of the United States. And the very final one, he, basically quotes a conversation that he was having with some woman. And she says to him, we need to feminize the planet. And he goes on to expand. I mean, he in a lot of ways, he said, what you just did. And, that struck me so much when he said that, because it was just like, wow, there's a great deal of truth. I love the fact that you talked about vandalism as metaphors, because I remember in this new self-published book, I actually started, writing a section called Move Slow and Fix Things instead of.
Right. Exactly. Move slow and fix things.
Yeah. So I think that one thing in particular that really struck me is the way that you opened the book by talking about the sort of Groundhog Day metaphor, because I had a friend, that at the CrossFit gym that I used to work out at when I lived in San Diego, and he would call me Hank Moody. I don't know if you've seen the TV show Californication. But, David Duchovny is this, really brilliant writer who basically goes around LA sleeping with every hot woman who, he runs into in a bar, driving a Porsche, having these like crazy adventures. And I would tell him, Travis, my life is nowhere as near as interesting as Hank Moody's. And I don't think any writer's life would be that interesting. In fact, I think if you made a movie about most people's writing life, it would be like, here's Srini sitting at a desk. That would be it.
Oh my God! Yeah.
So, and you say that the creative journey is not one in which you're crowned the triumphant hero and live happily ever after. The creative journey is one in which you wake up every day, like Phil, referring to Groundhog Day, with more work to do. And so outside of the perception of the artistic life that media creates, why do people have this sort of glamorous vision of what this could be?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I tried watching Dickinson, the sort of this kind of like, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, it's so offensive to me. I finally, the thing that broke me about trying to watch that show was I was just like, it seemed to, the things I've read about Emily Dickinson, it's like her domestic life and her poetics were like deeply interwoven. I mean, like she would scribble poems on the back of like envelopes and like scrap pieces of paper and stuff. And in the show, it's like she's always trying to get away from the domestic life. And I think it's such a betrayal of what I sort of see. I mean, I know they're trying to make her into like this icon in that show, and I haven't gotten very far in the show, but it was just so against what I had like sort of read about Emily Dickinson that I just in her like it just ruined it for me. And I'm fascinated by the depiction of writers in media, but I don't know where people get this idea that writing is like a fun. I don't know. I mean, most of the writers I know are just nerds, you know. I mean, just like, particularly like, I mean, I spent a lot of time around cartoonists when I was coming up. Now, there's a bunch of freaks. I mean, you know some cartoonists. I mean, they are. I mean, freaks. Anyone who would pick an art form that is that labor intensive, that takes. I mean, a cartoon takes so many hours to produce and takes almost no time to read. It's so labor intensive. But the Groundhog Day thing for me was really less about the glamour and more about it was less about the glamour of the writing life and more about the repetition of the life. I think that's the thing that I think people can sort of get it through their head that writing's hard and that it's not necessarily glamorous. What they really can't get through their heads is how every single freaking time you sit down to write a book, it is you just have to learn again. I mean, so many of the people I know, unless, they're a robot like Ryan Holiday, who's a friend of mine.
Likewise.
Unless you just have this like extremely disciplined routine in which you have the system for cranking out books. Yeah. I mean, most of the writers I really, really admire deeply who wrote the work I did, they just talk about it as like every book is like you just have to figure it out every time. Yeah. And that sense of return, that idea that you're back, that it loops, But the thing about Phil is like every time it's a new thing, but he does accumulate experience. I mean, in the movie, he has things to rely on, even though he faces the same thing every day. He does build up a skill and a wisdom over time. And I think that's what the writer has. And when I sit down to write a new book, I realize like I'm going to have to go through all the horrible things I usually go through when I'm writing a book. But the thing is that I've been there before. And so I know when I'm having a terrible day, if I just get to the end of it, that the next day will be better. And just that little bit of knowledge lets me keep going when, someone just starting out would have a harder time.
Mm-hmm. So, sorry, keep going. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
So just that loop. I mean, for me, I just thought that life, when I was younger, I thought life would be a straight line. It was just like I would just accumulate wealth and power and fame, whatever. It was
you and me both.
Whatever it was, it was just like going to be a straight line. And it just feels more looping to me now. Like I'm stuck in loops that I orbit the planet. I orbit the sun along with the earth. And on each rotation, there are too many echoes. And I think, for me, a lot of it's been, people make fun of middle-aged white guys who read Thoreau, mostly because they take the wrong things from Thoreau. Like, if the message you get from Thoreau is like, I should go live in the woods by myself, like you're an idiot. Like, I mean, you really don't understand, like you haven't got it. Because to me, what reading Thoreau has done for me is to pay deep attention to the rhythms of life and the seasons, and to take lots of walks and look at the world and come back and write about it. That is what I take from Thoreau. And I think reading his work, walking every day in my neighborhood, and keeping a diary has put me in touch with the sort of circular rhythms of life more than, anything else. And I do think, because I've been a parent for 8 years, there's a certain amount of brain damage that comes from having young children, where you're just kind of like, it's just, you have a kind of amnesia, and it's evolutionary. It's literally, if you knew how terrible you felt when you had a newborn, you wouldn't have any more kids. Like, if you could remember, people wouldn't keep having kids if they remember, if they had the choice, but like, if you, for me, it's like there was a certain amount of amnesia. But with my second kid, I was like, wait a minute, fool me twice. No, I'm just kidding. But there was a sense of, I've noticed this even in my family life, where it's like, I can recognize patterns now because I've noticed them and written them down in my diary. And I think that, people talk about how boring their diary is. Oh, I don't know. I tried to keep a diary for a while, but it was so boring or whatever. And I was like, well, what do you think it's supposed to be, dummy? Like, it's supposed to be boring because it shows you what your life actually is. Like, your life is mainly mundane. It is that is what life is it's mainly mundane. But if you do it long enough, you start noticing your own patterns, and then some sort of wisdom comes out of that, or the opposite, where you realize that, like, this is just a loop you go through, and you'll go through it again, and it's just the passage of time. You get what I'm saying? Like,
absolutely.
But I just feel deeply that learning more about nature, learning more about seasons and cycles, and the idea of sort of a natural time versus man-made time, it's just really opened up, how I think about creative work now. It feels like so much of what we do is fighting our own natural impulses,
Well, I think that makes a perfect segue to talking about sort of where I want to wrap things up, money and metrics. I think that, like I told you before we hit record, there was one quote that stayed with me from Steal Like an Artist that honestly, like, that has kind of been the compass for how I choose to do what I do. And that was hearts over eyeballs. But you keep going, say, we used to have hobbies. Now we have side hustles. Everyone who's turned their passion into their breadwinning knows this is dangerous territory. One of the easiest ways to hate something you love is to turn it into your job, taking the thing that keeps you alive spiritually and turning it into the thing that keeps you alive literally. You must be mindful of what potential impact monetizing your passions could have on your life. You might find that you're better off with a day job, which is kind of funny because it kind of brings us full circle to something we were talking about earlier. And, I think people understand that. And yet, how many books, how many self-help gurus, hell, how many podcasters will go out and tell you the exact opposite? Chris Guillebeau has an entire conference dedicated to the opposite of this message.
Yeah. Chris doesn't pay people, by the way.
I know that.
Speaking of that conference, which I think is hilarious.
I've never spoken at it. So no, he's literally built he's built a cult as far as I'm concerned.
So,
I asked him about this. I said, you seem to have an implicit understanding of cult psychology, because literally somebody compared WDS, like when they went, they said it felt like a cult. And I was like, yeah, that's because there are definitely elements of it.
Oh God. Good night, folks. Oh my goodness. I forget what the question was.
Not a question as much as an observation, but
I don't think I've
is,
laughed so much in a podcast, which is a really good sign for me.
Well, the thing is, I think that this has really been on my mind lately because I'm writing a book that's literally titled "Not Another Damn Self-Help Book," and a lot of it is questioning what comes out of this sort of personal development ecosystem. Because 1,000 interviews, hundreds of people I've talked to over the years, I realize all of this messaging completely ignores context.
Yes. Here's what I would tell people about self-help and self-help writers. Suspicion is always great.
Yes, agreed.
The other thing I would say, though, in Zen, Buddhism, and there are a bunch of like John Cage has a lot of really good stories about like Zen masters and stuff. Read the great stories about Zen masters, because the best teachers are the reluctant ones. Like, the people you want to listen to and learn from are not the people advertising their teachings. Like, I am really suspicious now. There are people in the culture who really want to be self-help authors. And I'm like, why? That's your dream? Why? Like, for me, I mean, I fell into self-help really by accident, because what I was trying to do was be an artist. And what I happened to find out, and many artists have found this out, W.H. Auden talked about how a poet will always make more money than about talking about making poetry than you will by actually making poetry.
Yep.
And he said that 50, 60 years ago. My thing was, it was like, look, I know I'm not good enough for anyone to care yet, but I'm learning. And so the idea was, I will share with you what I'm learning along the way, and maybe you'll find something interesting in it. And that will make me interesting enough for you to follow along with. And then eventually, maybe I'll make something that you'll love and you'll like. Mm-hmm. That was sort of my game in the beginning. And I'm very obsessed with this idea. I think that like so many great books are accidents. I mean, like, you take something like the Meditations, like Aurelius's Meditations, which I know, Ryan loves so much. And the thing we talk about sometime is like, that book's a mistake. Like, that's not supposed to be a book. That's like something some dude wrote down for himself. It's not, it's like, it wasn't supposed to be like a best-selling book or whatever, And I think that way about Steal Like an Artist. Like, Steal Like an Artist was a collection of blog posts that became a talk that became a book. I mean, there's an accidental element to it. And so when I realized it was going to be I just never really thought about self-help until I became a self-help author, which is so weird. But in hindsight, I mean, it's sort of like, once I learned I was writing in this genre, then it just became like, well, how can I play with this? And so every book has been like my attempt to sort of play with the genre, and specifically to play with the genre of the self-help gift book, which is like the kind of thing you would find by the cash register at a Paper Source or a FedEx Kinko's.
Yeah.
But, like, for me, it's like, look at people who are doing work that you actually, instead of looking for people who have a message that you really like, I mean, you might want to spend a little bit more time like looking at people who are in the world the way you'd want to be in the world, or who are processing you know what I mean? Like, doing work that you, I'm trying to figure out how to like put this, like, I mean, my great fear in life is becoming the guy who, if I'm ever able to travel again and I end up on a conference stage again, someone looks at him and says, but what does he do? But what is this what he does? You know what I mean? Because it's like, I don't know. I just think there's something about the reluctant teacher. I mean, there's something about the Zen master who the guy shows up. There's a great story that John Cage tells in Silences. A guy goes out to the woods, finds a Zen master, and the Zen master is on his porch sweeping leaves. And the guy says, Zen master, teach me, please. I've come all the way out to the middle of the woods here, and I'm asking you, like, please teach me. Zen master ignores him. So he goes off for a while, makes a campfire, comes back next day. Zen master, please teach me. I'll do anything. I'll be anything. I'll do, whatever. Zen master just ignores him, keeps raking leaves. Same thing happens. It goes up, builds a campfire, comes back next day. Zen master, please, I'm begging you, teach me. Just please teach me your secret. Zen master ignores him, keeps, raking leaves or whatever. Finally, the guy says, screw this. This is terrible. Goes off back into the world, does something else, builds a house. And one day he's out on his front porch and he's raking leaves, and it hits him like a ton of bricks. He runs back into the woods and he finds the Zen master who's still raking leaves. He says, Zen master, thank you. And that's the parable. That's it. That's it, man. Like, and I think some people would be like, what? If your average American hears that, is like, what? But like everything in there is in there to be in the world doing the work. And to just be there doing it, in a sense, is a form of teaching. What more teaching do you need? He's right there. He's right there in front of you. He's doing the work, And every parable, part of the thing with parables is that they teach, it's very dependent on the hearable of the parable to understand what's going on. But for me, it's just like, I love a reluctant teacher. I want people to stop. And in fact, I love that people read my books, but I want them to remember when they're reading my books that my books they don't come out of the urge to teach. They come out of the urge to share. They come out of the urge to learn something and to share what I've learned, not out of the sense of wanting to be a guru or a teacher or a leader. They come out of, these are things I've learned. I'm writing them down for myself. Maybe you'll find something interesting in them. And I try now at every talk I give to tell people that, to say, look, I'm trying to remain a student. I hope you've learned something here today, but I am learning too. And this is my way of learning. Writing books is my way of learning. And you can make anyone a teacher. You can make dead people your teachers. The great thing about dead people is they can't refuse you as a student. They left everything they know in their work. You can learn from that. You don't need a teacher. What you need is to become a student.
I love that. Yeah, it's funny because I think even the introduction to the book that I'm writing, I basically, said, I want you to read this with skepticism, and above all things, consider the possibility that every single word I've written here is absolute and utter bullshit.
Yeah, it's always a good strategy to read with a sense of skepticism.
Yeah. Wow. Well,
this went around.
I love conversations like this because you packed it with so many brilliant insights and nuggets. So I want to finish with my final question, which is how we finish all of our interviews with the Unmistakable Creative. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
I'm really starting to. I play all the time with the idea of I wrestle so much with authenticity, this notion of authenticity, because it seems to me so worthless in art and in other realms too. But there is something that I think makes someone unmistakable, which is just really being yourself, really. And I know that's so cliched, like be yourself, like what? But I feel like there's a way when you put on a mask that you're more like who you are than when you're naked. There are costumes you can put on where you're more of yourself. And if, we've learned anything from modern culture, it's that we should let people try on. I love drag. I love what RuPaul says about drag. She says, RuPaul says, we're all born naked and the rest is drag. And I just think what makes someone unmistakable is just, you get the feeling that they've sort of self-realized that they're sort of like, this is who it's sort of a pure essence, I guess. is what I'm looking for in art. I'm sort of looking for like someone who it seems like they figure out how to fire on all cylinders, to take all the pieces of themselves and kind of bring it all together into something unique. Like they're not denying any part of themselves. They're using the whole deal. That seems unmistakable to me.
Amazing. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us and sharing your story and insights with our listeners. Where can people find out more about you, your work, your books, and everything else you're up to?
I'm old fashioned. Just go to austinkleon.com. And my website is kind of the portal. It's still the portal. It's the thing that's the most up to date. It's the thing I pour myself into every day. I would encourage anyone who enjoyed this conversation to, if you can stand the sound of my voice, there's a new audiobook that has all 3 of my books bunched together in a somewhat affordable package, and I would recommend those. And then, but the favorite thing I do online is I have a weekly newsletter that's free, and it is my favorite thing I do online, and it's very easy to sign up for it and then unsubscribe if you don't like it. So austinkleon.com.
Awesome. And for everybody listening, we will wrap the show with that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. While you were listening, were there any moments you found fascinating, inspiring, instructive, maybe even heartwarming? Can you think of anyone, a friend or a family member who would appreciate this moment? If so, take a second and share today's episode with that one person, because good ideas and messages are meant to be shared.